Today, I want to talk about early retirement, specifically extreme early retirement, and exactly what type of sacrifices are required if you want to make that happen. Let's get into it. If you don't know me, I'm Spencer, and I like to talk about simple living, frugality, and ways to cut down on your technology usage, sometimes by using other technologies. So, last week I made a video responding to a comment that I received about whether financial independence, and particularly the FIRE movement and what they are preaching, is something of a fantasy, whether it's an illusion and whether it's not really something that's practical for everyone, something that anybody can actually achieve. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about that because when I made that video, I got a little bit of pushback, friendly pushback, but pushback nonetheless. A lot of people were telling me about how they can really only save small amounts each month and that, saving anything more than that just isn't on the cards for them right now. And, I can respect that people are in different situations and their savings rate is going to vary depending on their income and depending on their expenses. But today I want to talk a little bit about what is truly required if you want to FIRE, if you want to reach financial independence and retire early, because you need to be extreme. It's not something that you can just do in half measures and expect it to come true because, retirement on its own isn't really a guarantee unless you're willing to save a lot of money and put in the work to get there. And early retirement, as a result, is even more hard to do than regular retirement, especially if you want to retire 20 years earlier than the average person is going to retire ultimately, like in their 60s and then retiring maybe at 40. You're going to need to put a lot more work in. You're going to have to make more sacrifices and you're going to have to be creative and smart about how you approach your life so you're still able to thrive and enjoy your life without feeling like you are being deprived of anything. On this channel, I talk a lot about Jacob Lund-Fisker, author of both the blog and the book Early Retirement Extreme. His book and blog have both been really impactful to me since I found out about them in the beginning of this year, pretty much like January of this year. I have devoured all of his work and I'm enjoying every little bit of it. It has been hugely inspirational to me and has really become, to a degree, my Bible in this whole process of retiring extremely early. Something that Jacob talks about is that if you want to retire extreme, you can't do it in anything less than extreme, right? This can't be done in baby steps. It has to be done in quantum leaps. That's a quote from his blog. You have to make these sacrifices and you have to go without, not to the point that you're depriving yourself, I don't think. I think it's just seems like deprivation in relation to what everybody else is doing, in relation to the Joneses. So today I want to talk about what I think is truly necessary so that anyone at nearly any income level is able to retire extremely early. What steps are actually necessary, and then how to accomplish that while feeling like you are still thriving and you're not depriving yourself once again. And honestly, the elements from this, I'm going to probably break out into smaller chunks, into separate videos basically, where I can expand on each of these. But I kind of just wanted to hit them all in some degree for this video here and let you guys just know as a direct video follow-up to a few of the comments that I received on my last video. So the first thing is that people talk about early retirement and the extreme kind of frugality that is required to retire early as a level of deprivation. I don't fully believe that to be true. I think that deprivation, it's can be quite subjective, at least in this sense. And what people might call deprivation is something that we would call an extreme luxury even 5 or 10 years ago. So let's say 10 years ago, having something as capable as an iPhone would have been considered a luxury. Not everybody had the newest iPhone 10 years ago, at least when I was young, maybe 15 years ago. Nowadays, something like that seems like it is a must-have. And if you don't have the newest iPhone, it does seem like you're depriving yourself a little bit. You look at somebody who has an older phone and you think, oh, I'm sorry for you. But that's crazy because 15 years ago, that would have been the craziest phone ever. And it's like we've just kind of gotten used to these changes. And what used to seem like a luxury now just seems like you'd be depriving yourself to go without it. And I think that's the case for a lot of things in our lives. A lot of people would also see it as deprivation to not own a car that is maybe 5 years old or even newer than that. Own anything older than that would be to them owning some sort of jalopy, owning some sort of just kind of junker, right? They would think, oh, there's a chance something could go wrong. And in their mind, they're depriving themselves of some sort of sense of security or safety or whatever it is. In the comments of a lot of my videos about streaming services, people consider not having Spotify or Netflix or one of the other streaming platforms, not having one of those to them feels like deprivation. But 10 years ago, most people didn't have a streaming service yet. I only got Netflix, I think, in about 2016, Spotify around the same time. Previous to that, I couldn't imagine having something like that. And when I first got it, it really did feel like a luxury. But at this point, it feels like a necessity. The point is that now that we've habituated to these things, it seems like a huge leap to go without them. But people were doing just fine without these things. It just seems abnormal because it's become normalized. And that's not a good enough reason. A lot of things in our society have become normalized that aren't necessarily always the best. It's become normalized to have a car loan. In fact, I think the average number is around $700 a month for the average person who is financing a vehicle. It's also become normalized to get a university degree, something that can be extremely expensive and doesn't necessarily help your job prospects, especially in the market that we're in now. People are going to university because it's the normal thing to do. When I went to university, my parents wouldn't think of me doing anything other than that, and ultimately it was a later one-year college diploma that ended up getting me into my career that I'm in now. My university degree didn't really have anything to do with my thing that I'm doing now. And this is the case for a lot of people. And I was lucky that I went to a small school. I lived at home when I went to university and I was able to pay it off. But the average person, it's normal to walk out of school with $100,000 of debt, or maybe even more in some cases, and maybe only make maybe $30,000 at your first job out of school. So clearly things like that, though normalized, aren't really good things. They're not things that we should strive for, and they're things that we should happily let go of. And I guess that's part of what is really integral to retiring extremely early. That is challenging the assumptions of what we need to have in our society, deciding what we can go without and what are our true needs and what are our true wants, being able to differentiate those things and parse out what's really important and then leave the rest behind. So just summarizing, the first thing is to question what's normal, because a lot of things are considered deprivation nowadays, which 10 or 20 years ago would have been considered a luxury. 100 years ago, people wouldn't have even dreamed of it. And we can't imagine giving it up now. So question that. Now, moving on to the second thing, people were talking about housing costs and how housing costs are the main thing holding them back from saving money, which is 100%, I agree with that. Housing costs are the majority of my costs each month as well. And for most people, it's pretty well the same. There's not really too many places that you can move nowadays where your housing cost isn't absurd. The thing is, though, that housing is another luxury that we have just become accustomed to. Not having shelter in general, I'm not going to go that far, but having the size of houses and certain places, like locations of houses that we come to expect, that people have come to expect, those things are not actually a given. And especially if you're not earning a lot of money, you have to be willing to compromise in those areas. And ideally, that wouldn't be the case. Like ideally, we all got some sort of, I don't know, universal basic income or some sort of housing support, or there was some sort of policy cap on how much housing was like allowed to be charged for. And everybody would be able to have their own independent dwelling unit that was nice. That would be the best thing. I'm not saying that it's like a hard knock life and you got to get used to it, but currently life is kind of hard and we have to make adjustments depending on what our situations are. Especially if you're single and you're not earning a ton of money, I think you have to consider having roommates, some sort of co-housing situation where you're living with other people. You can have your own room, obviously, but sharing a house, a dwelling with other people. Especially where I live in Toronto, housing was extremely expensive. The first place that I moved into when I moved to the city was a bachelor apartment. It was a studio, a single room. I had all of it to myself, obviously, but it was a serious dive. Like, it was cheap by Toronto standards. I took over my brother's old apartment when he moved on to another place, so it was locked in at a previous year's lower rent. But even then, it was a lot for what it was. That place came with hundreds of cockroaches. It had a mouse living in the ceiling that descended out of the light fixture occasionally. It was not a nice place to live. And oftentimes I thought of moving, but it was just out of the question, because to move by myself into another unit that was nicer than what I had was going to be at least 40% more money in order to do that. And I just didn't have the money to do that. It was way too tight for me to already pay for the place that I was living, let alone consider going to someplace better if I was going to live on my own. So at that time, I started investigating living with roommates because I wanted to live somewhere different. I certainly didn't want to stay where I was, but I also didn't have the money to move out on my own anywhere by myself again. So that became something of a consideration. And thankfully, I met my girlfriend and I hung in with that bad apartment for an extra year before we moved in together, and now I am much happier. But once again, this is a co-housing situation. We're cohabitating and we're splitting only a slightly more expensive place between the two of us, and that is a better way to go. If you're single and you don't have the luxury of sharing an apartment with a loved one, with a spouse or whatever it is, then you really want to consider looking for roommates. But I know once you get out of that kind of college, university mindset, living with roommates seems kind of like a dorm thing that you want to leave in the past. It doesn't seem fitting of an adult that you would live with other people who aren't your spouse or a family member. Ultimately, you have to challenge that belief, because if you are going to live on your own as a single person who maybe isn't earning a ton of money, you just have to accept then that you're not going to save most of your money. Most of your money is going to go to that housing cost, and retirement is going to be really far off for you. If you're serious about retiring early, throughout your entire life, you're going to have to question the ways that are considered normal, as I mentioned, how people are approaching life in all different respects. But housing is your biggest category of expenses, so I think it requires the biggest questioning. And I think if you're single, living with somebody else, no matter what that looks like, should be top of mind for you. It's normal. It's fine. Again, I wish there was some sort of policy thing that we could each have our own unique dwelling. Maybe down the line that's a possibility, but right now, being realistic, that's something that you really need to consider. Don't be afraid of it. There's no shame in it. Moving on to the third thing which I wanted to talk about, which I don't have any direct experience on, but I do have some opinions on, and that is being frugal and saving money with children in the picture. A couple people commented on the video I did before, referring to the fact that having children really limits their ability to save any money. And I completely understand why that would be a thing, and I understand that that would, if you're living like a normal person, limit your saving capability. 100% it would. I think once again we have to refer to number one, which is question how people are normally doing things and whether that normal is really right for you and how you want to approach your life and your future. In my mind, as somebody who maybe wants to have a child in the next few years, let's put it off quite a few years, a child doesn't have to be more than another mouth to feed. Most likely, whatever country you're living in, school, public school, is public and it is available for free. All you need to do is provide food to that child, clothe them, and give them love and attention. And all of that stuff can pretty much be acquired for very little cost. Especially if you're cooking from scratch and you're cooking healthy, basic meals, you're just talking about one other serving. And if your meals are maybe $1 a serving or $2 a serving, we're talking $2 a meal, $1 a meal extra. And a kid eats less, so it's even going to be a smaller percentage of that amount as well. Clothing, I get most of my clothes from thrift stores, and they're sub $10 per item. I can make a video on that in the future. If you'd like to hear from that, let me know. But my point is, if that's what is fitting for me to wear, then why would I expect that my child needs to wear the nicest brand new clothes from the store, right? I can find perfectly good, nice fitting, in good shape, used clothing that can be provided to my child as well. School aside, school's usually free, but after school activities like sports programs and other things, that can be quite costly. If your kid goes on any sort of like class trips, maybe like to another country, God forbid, it might be quite pricey. These things, again, I would say question what is really what is considered normal, and what is best for you. A lot of after-school activities exist because parents are too busy to do anything with their kids because they're busy working, so they send the kid off after school to do something else so they can finish up their time at their job. Of course, there's an element of socialization that happens that is beneficial for kids doing team activities and meeting other kids, but a lot of that can just happen with kids around the neighborhood for free by letting them hang out with people that are around. It doesn't need to happen at some sort of organized thing where an adult is being paid to chaperone your kid. If you're being frugal in a lot of other areas and you're freeing up some of your time by cutting some of your costs, hopefully you're going to be able to use some of that extra time because you want to spend with your child. So your child will have more time that you're spending with them and therefore need less time to be outsourced to other people by sending them to these types of activities. So that should also reduce some of the cost for children as well. You know, I have pretty simple interests, the things that I like. Like I like to read books, I like to go for walks, I like to, take photos, wildlife photos, do bird watching, things like this. I would like to pass a lot of those activities and interests onto my child one day. And a lot of those activities really have very little cost. Another thing that I actually like to do is play guitar. Once you buy the guitar, very little cost after the fact. It's the cost of the guitar, and I can teach them, and it's over. So a lot of these activities that you want to teach your kid are likely, if you're doing frugal activities, are going to be frugal activities as well. And if you enjoy them, why not some child would enjoy it? So I think we need to just have this mindset that a lot of these things that we do, if we are living a cheap and frugal life, then there's no reason that a kid can't live a cheap and frugal life as well. Of course, there's going to be things that the other kids are doing that your child is going to want to partake in, and you don't want them to miss out on certain things. So there's going to be costs, of course. However, I think most of that cost can be greatly reduced just by really questioning, once again, back to number one, what is considered normal and what is best for you. A great channel talking about frugal living and financial independence on an extreme budget is the channel Under the Median. The couple Hope and Larry Ware who run that channel were able to raise their 4 children all while making under the median income for the United States, all raising them on a single income as well. Their channel is a great resource for all things frugality and money saving alike, and especially if you're looking to save money while raising children, look no further than Under the Median. I have linked their channel in the description. I'm going to read quickly from Jacob's blog here. I got a post up here about really what type of extreme actions are required if you want to retire extremely early. Very germane to the subject. I just want to read it to you because he's more extreme than me. I want to be as extreme as him, but I'm not there yet. So I still read this blog almost daily as a source of inspiration to push me to be more extreme in my practices. I would say in summary that for me, the path to early retirement was more of a journey to an unknown destination. I did not have a plan of what to do when I decided to become financially independent. In fact, that was not even my original plan. I just wanted to avoid mortgaging myself to a job. Practically everything out there, books, retirement plans, tax law, is tailored towards having people work and work and work with, as I see it, consumption of stuff being the only justification for their existence. Has anyone else noticed how politicians refer to people as consumers rather than citizens? People's situations are complex, but one thing I think that many people don't realize is that they have a lot more control over their life than they think that they do. If they knew this, would they really choose the option of working from dawn until sunset merely to fill their homes with more and more things? I wouldn't, and I haven't, and all it took was that decision. It's fine if you don't want to be extreme, but you have to accept that this is our decision ultimately. And though we can't fully affect change in our lives 100%, there's our outside influences, of course, we can make a huge difference through the actions that we take every day. And it's up to you whether you decide to take those actions or not. Let me know your thoughts on this video. Do you think that a lot of this stuff seems way too extreme for you, or does this excite you? If it does, then please take a look at the Early Retirement Extreme blog if you haven't. Consider picking up a copy of the book. It's pretty much a compendium of everything that's the best parts of the blog all in one book. I'll link that down in the description as well as the blog if you're interested in picking up either of those or reading one or the other. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.